So you're learning Hebrew and you need to know how to conjugate verbs. I am here to help. Let's get started with regular pa'al verbs. Welcome back to Hebrew Grammar Help. Today I'm going to take you through all of the conjugations of regular pa'al verbs, what we would call binyan pa'al, gizrat hashlemim. If you are completely new to Hebrew verbs and you haven't already checked out these videos, you might want to check them out. I've got G7, which is shorashim, G8, which is verbs, the basics, G9, verb tenses, and G11, recognizing binyanim. That's a lot of videos to watch, I understand. You don't necessarily need to go and watch those first. I will try to explain everything here. So the binyan that we're doing today is pa'al, and it's usually the binyan that students learn first. And these are the regular conjugations, so there are no letters that drop out or change for the most part. So what happens when we learn the conjugations of a verb is that we learn the templates, and then we learn how the shoresh letters fit into those templates. All right, so here we have an example of the infinitive template for pa'al verbs. In English and in Hebrew, we cannot actually use these as a main verb. They have to come after another verb, like want, need, like, stuff like that. I want to do something. I need to do. I like to do. So let's look at this template. We see a lamed at the beginning with a chirik under it. So it's going to sound like li. And then we have this green space with a schwa under it. And then we have an orange space with a dagesh in the middle, the dot in the middle, followed by a cholam maleh, the vav with the dot over it that sounds like an O, and then a purple space. So what does this all mean? These spaces are reserved for the shoresh letter. And those are going to be different depending on what you are trying to say. And as long as your verb is a pa'al verb and you don't have any problem letters, this is the template that you're going to use. Let's get a little practice putting shoresh letters into this template. We'll start with my favorite example, shoresh, kaf taf bet, which has to do with inscribing or writing. We insert the kaf and the taf and the bet. Notice that I said kaf, because that's the name of the letter, but there isn't a dagesh in this green box, and so it's actually going to be a chaf. It's going to have that ch sound. This orange box does have a dagesh, and that indicates that any begad kafat letter is going to be hardened. The dagesh is actually only there for begad kafat letters. If you have a different letter that goes in there, like a lamed, then it does not get a dagesh. But none of that actually really matters because we are adults and we don't write with nikud. So we have a chaf, a taf, and a vet, because there's never a dagesh on the last letter of a word. And so now we can sound out this word, lichtov, and it means to write, lichtov, to write. Let's try another one. Lamed mem dalet has to do with learning and studying. So we put our lamed and then our mem, and then we remove that dagesh because mem is not a begad kafat letter. And then we have a dalet. And then we have li lamod. Voila, to study. And that's how it's done. Now you know how to make an infinitive pa'al verb. Oh, but there is so much more. And that's what we're here for, so let's get to it. All right, I decided to make these tables nice and big so you can see them really well. Present tense, remember, only varies by gender and number, not by person. And the base form is the masculine singular. So masculine singular is going to have a hardening dagesh in the first position. In modern Hebrew, if the word starts with a begad kafat letter, it has a dagesh. And of course, we really only care if it's bet, kaf, or pei, because those are the only letters that have a sound change. Okay, back to our template. So we have our first shoresh letter with a dagesh. And then that letter has a chola maleh after it, a vav with a dot sounding like O. And then we have our second letter without a dagesh. And the vowel under it is tsere, sounding like E. And then we have our last shoresh letter. So the dagesh is always a part of the template. And this explains why some of the letters sound different in different forms of the verb. All right, so here's my favorite sample verb, lichtov, meaning to write. And we put our letters in here, and we have kotev for any singular masculine person. So if I were male, I could say ani kotev, and that means I write. Or if I'm talking to you and you're male, I could say ata kotev, and that means you write. Or I could talk about him and say he's writing or he writes, and I say hu kotev. Moving on. Feminine singular starts the same as the masculine singular. And then the second shoresh letter has a segol. And the third shoresh letter also has a segol. And then there's a taf at the end. Because of these two segols, the stress is going to be on the second to last syllable. So, putting in my sample shoresh, we have kotevet, kotevet. Ani kotevet, at kotevet, he kotevet. All right, and for masculine plural, we again start the same. And we always start the same because the masculine singular is the basic form, and then we use it to build the other forms. So this second letter is going to have a schwa under it. So no sound or possibly a short eh sound, depending on what the consonants are around it. And then the last shoresh letter has a chirik, and then we have a yud and a mem sofit. And so lichtov in the masculine plural is going to be kotvim. So it's not too difficult to say the T sound and then the V sound without putting a sound in between. Kotvim, right? I can say that pretty easily. But the shoresh nun daled daled, which means wandering or migrating or traveling, if we want to say they wander, now we're going to have two daleds with a schwa in between. So what we have to do is stick a little short little eh in there, and we get nodedim. And then lastly, we have the feminine plural, which again starts the same as the others. And then the second shoresh letter gets a schwa. And the third is followed by a chola maleh and then a taf. And so to say they write or those gals write, we get kotvot. It can also be we write, anachnu kotvot. Or it can be you ladies write, aten kotvot. All right, so now you know all of the regular pa'al present tense templates. So let us move on to the past tense. So here is the official set of past tense templates for pa'al. But I want you to pay attention to these vowels over here in the second person plural forms. According to pealim.com, those are the official templates, but in daily speech, people say the verbs this way, with a kamatz underneath the first letter. Pealim also says that the stressed syllable shifts, but that's not reflected in the writing. I didn't know about this official template with the different vowel and the different stress, but what Pealim says is the spoken form is what I learned. And since we don't write with nikud, this is really not an issue. But I wanted to mention it in case there are any sticklers among my viewers. So we can see that the first and second person have the vowels kamatz, then patach, and then shwa under the respective shoresh letters. And then the appropriate past tense personal ending. Third person masculine singular follows this same pattern, except that because there's no suffix, the last letter has no vowel instead of a schwa. And of course, it ends up sounding the same. The other two forms, and these two should really only be written once because they are always the same, but I'm not so great at making tables, so I wasn't able to merge them. These two are a little different because their suffixes are stressed vowels. So their first letter still has its kamatz, but the second letter gets a schwa, and then the third letter gets the vowel. So in the case of the third person singular feminine, that vowel is a kamatz, and then there's a hey afterwards. And then in the case of the third person plural, it's a shuruk, looking like a vav and sounding like an u. Oh, Sapir, this is so confusing. Why don't you just give us an example verb? Okay. Here's lichtov, my favorite, to write in the past tense. Listen for the stress. It's always on the second syllable. Katavti, katavta, katavt, katav, katva, katavnu, katavtem, katavten, katvu. All right, moving on to future. Remember that future tense always has prefixes, and some of the forms also have suffixes. So the forms that do not have suffixes generally rhyme with the infinitive. So if the infinitive is lichtov with that hirik on the lamed, then most of the prefixes are also going to get that hirik. But aleph doesn't like a chirik. The aleph prefers a more substantial vowel, and so in this binyan, the aleph gets a segol. So as I go through some of these, think about how they sound like the infinitive, lichtov. Ani echtov. Ata tichtov. Hu yichtov. Hi tichtov. Anachnu nichtov. Okay, so now second person singular feminine needs something to distinguish it from the masculine. So it gets a yod suffix. And because of that yod suffix, it loses its o vowel and it gets a schwa instead. So tichtevi. And the second and third person plural also need something to distinguish them from the singular. So they also lose their vowel and get an u vowel at the very end. So atem ve'aten tichtevu and hem ve'hen yichtevu. Another question that always arises is what the heck is going on with this stinking he form? It's always the same as the second person masculine. This is true across all of the binyanim, across all of the gezarot, everything, whether it's regular, irregular, the he form is always going to be the same as the ata form. All right, moving on to the imperative. In most daily speech, you use future tense instead of the actual imperative forms, but I do see them mostly in workbooks meant for Israeli kids. They always give the instructions using the actual command form rather than the future. They are basically based off of the future forms with the prefix removed, but then also with some Hebrew rules applied after that prefix was removed. So let's look at lichtov. The future tense of the second person singular masculine would be tichtov. So we take off the taf and its vowel, and then we end up with chtov. But if the first letter of a Hebrew word is a begad kafat letter, like I mentioned before, then it needs a dagesh. And so we're not going to say chtov, we're going to say ktov. And there you go. Now, for feminine, it would be tichtevi. So we remove the T, and then we have htevi. And for the same reason as with the ata form, that chaf, the chaf needs a dagesh, making it a hard K sound. So it's ktevi. And now we have the first two letters of a word that both have a schwa. And that is illegal in Hebrew. So that schwa is going to convert to a chirik. So kitvi. Voila. And for the plural, it's going to go through basically the same processes as with the feminine. So we have tichtevu. We remove the T and we've got chtevu. The chaf converts into a kaf. And so we've got ktevu. And that first schwa converts to a chirik. And so now we have kitvu. Okay, the last form I'm going to teach you is the shem pe'ula, which most Israelis, when they tell you, when they try to say this in English, they'll say it's the verbal noun. I've learned so many languages, and I've never heard anybody else refer to anything as a verbal noun. But basically, it is often the present participle, like writing. It's the noun form that's based on this verb. So it's indicating the process of whatever the verb is, but it's used as a noun. So each binyan has its own way of forming a verbal noun. This is the one form that is actually not very consistent. So, but the best way is to learn the template for the regular verbs and then just remember the verbs that are different. So, of course, this is the template for the verbal noun of pa'al verbs. The first shoresh letter has a dagesh, of course, and a schwa. The second letter has a chirik, followed by a yod. And then the third letter has a kamatz, followed by a hey. So using my favorite sample verb, we would put in the kaf, the taf, and the bet, and we have ktiva. And this means writing, the process of writing something. So I know this has been a lot of information, and if you are serious about really getting familiar with these conjugations, I recommend practicing by finding a bunch of verbs. You can try to look up, Google can be your best friend. Look up pa'al verbs and try to make sure you don't have any problem letters. The problem letters are Aleph, Hey, Vav, Chet, Yod, Nun, and Ayin. And then just practice writing them throughout all of the forms, either in chart form, or you can make really short little sentences because you really want to focus on these verbs. And then you can go to pealim.com and you can use it to check your forms and make sure you wrote correctly. And I also recommend saying them out loud. And that's one of the beauties of Pealim. They do not have, they won't speak the verbs for you, but they give a really good pronunciation guide using English letters that includes the stressed syllable. So this is why I love Pealim.com so much. And I think it's a good idea to get really familiar with 1/10 at a time. I know I presented them all here today, but that doesn't mean you have to practice them all at the same time, right? You can get really good with present tense, and then once you're really confident in your present tense, you get really good at past tense, and so on. So that's it for today. Now you know how to conjugate all of the regular pa'al verbs in all of the tenses. You know how to make an infinitive. You know how to make a shem pe'ula. You know how to do the imperative, even though you probably won't use it. So you know it all. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot bapa'am aba'ah. See you next time.